All right, guys, welcome to episode 2 of Health Span Academy. We're very excited about our guest today. This is Dr. Mary Peirson. She was born in KW, Kitchener-Waterloo, so a little close to Guelph, and she's been practicing medicine since 1994. So tons of experience. And today's topic is going to be on COVID-19. She actually graduated from med school back in 1990. And from 95 till 2016, she worked for Wellington Dufferin Guelph Public Health in infectious disease, adolescents, and women's health. So she's got tons of experience in the area and also in patient education. She's got a big interest in that. More recently, since 2014, she's been the co-owner and CEO of ArtMed. That's an aesthetic medicine clinical practice they do dermatology and laser medicine downtown Guelph. And she's been posting lots of good information related to COVID-19 recently. So we're actually going to post her most recent article on the show page so you guys can check that out. It's really well written. We're going to talk a little bit about that article today. To start off though, Mary, I want to talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted you. I think like some people are sort of missing what's happened on the clinical side and kind of the front end of things. So talk about how it's impacted you personally and professionally.
Well, of course, I have a business. And so as any business owner, and I'm sure you can appreciate this, Craig, it has impacted my business in part because in the area for ArtMed, a lot of what we do is elective. It's not necessarily medically necessary, although I do have a section of my practice that is medically important. So I still actually am seeing those patients throughout the pandemic. So right now, for example, I'm open a day a week to see my medical patients, but my non-urgent aesthetic patients have to wait because that is not medically necessary. So with a stay-at-home order,
Right.
that part of my business is closed. And so we're doing parking lot pickups and we have an online store and that sort of thing. So like a lot of businesses, we've had to pivot. For myself personally, because I do have a practice or a background in primary care, last April, when we had the first shutdown, there was a call for primary care physicians to help with telehealth because, as many people are aware, Ontario Telehealth had nurses that would answer medical calls from patients. That's existed in Ontario for a very long time. But when the pandemic hit, we realized that access to urgent care clinics and Emerge were limited. So they asked family doctors to step up and see if they could help out with a new online virtual care platform, which is they do now have in Ontario. So I was one of the physicians who signed up. So that's part of what I do right now. It's different from my regular work pre-pandemic, but I went back to doing primary care on the Ontario telehealth platform. So I'm doing that. Every time we have a shutdown, I sign up for clinics and I do that from my living room at home. So it's kind of nice for me because I get to revisit my primary care background, and there's a great deal of need. People are really having difficulty accessing primary care, and they're also trying to determine, when do I need to go to hospital, when do I not, what can I manage at home, and they need access to renewals of their prescriptions and all kinds of stuff like that. So I've been really privileged to be able to help out on that sort of frontline way during the pandemic. So
that's great. Yeah, it's crazy. I just feel like we're on Zoom 24/7.
Oh man.
I think like clinically, like it's hard enough coaching somebody in fitness, but like assessing somebody's health problems, like I feel like that'd be really challenging. Is that a tough transition for you?
It is a bit challenging. I mean, you are quite right. You're limited, and I'm sure in your business too. There's a difference between being in person, even if you're not touching someone, but just looking at them in real time versus two-dimensional video. And certainly in healthcare, it is difficult. There's lots of stuff where it's difficult. I would like to examine that patient. I would like to see that in real time. We do have the capacity to upload photos and things like that on our platform. So that actually does go a long way to helping us because photos are way better than the live video. So there is some technological innovations that have been helpful, but it has its limitations compared to in person. I'm sure like you can run, PT and you can run classes virtually, but it's not the same exactly as being there in person.
It's not the same. I think it's opened up avenues though, especially, definitely in fitness. I think that you see how crazy the Peloton's kicked off. And do you see an equivalent in healthcare, like certain issues that are easier to deal with remotely? And do you see that being a direction that the healthcare system is
for
going?
Sure. So anything that any kind of chronic illness maintenance care. So if you can imagine someone who's a diabetic and needs regular visits with a physician, but they live remotely and they need to see an endocrinologist, coming in to town might be a 2-3 hour road trip for them. And if they're having to do that on a regular basis, it's a real barrier to care. So with the advent of all of this virtual care, we're able to see people, especially for that kind of maintenance stuff, so much easier. And the patients are telling us all the time, like, oh my God, this is so great. This is such an improvement, you know, especially people who live rurally or are more housebound, the elderly, you know, all of those people are really benefiting from this change, and it's normalizing it, right? Like, I'm sure that's true in fitness too, where you're normalizing that this is just another avenue. It's not always worse, better. It's just another opportunity, another option. And so in healthcare, definitely, this is an option. And we certainly hope it's going to stay to some extent this way, that this option will continue to exist after the pandemic, because I think patients have definitely found it to be a benefit, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah. The ease of access to the information makes it a little bit more sustainable for people to learn from, and obviously the easier something is to do, the more likely people are to do it, right? So
well, and that's truly what it is, because people will skip appointments or no-shows. No-shows are a huge problem for us in healthcare, right? And so they're less likely to do that if it's an easy thing of just zooming in at a particular time. So I see an improvement in that kind of thing, especially for people with chronic illness. It's going to be great.
That's great.
Yeah, Mary, so a segue into the vaccine. I know Craig alluded to your article that you wrote. I read through it myself, and it's very it condenses kind of everything into a simplified version of knowledge and understanding the vaccine and how it works. We just kind of want to touch base and ask you, like, kind of what your mission is behind writing this article, kind of what you're, who you're trying to target audience wise, and how you're trying to inform them. Just kind of run us through what your outcome was.
Well, you guys mentioned in the opening that I worked at Wellington Dufferin Public Health for many years. I've always had a very strong interest in preventive care. Trying to keep people healthy is way easier than trying to get them healthy once they're ill or once,
Right.
So maintenance of health is really, really important. And the most effective way to keep a population healthy. So vaccine obviously has been a huge, huge improvement in the quality of health, worldwide for the last century and a half. So I'm, as a public health physician background, I'm very strong proponent of vaccines. That said, I understand that there is a lot of vaccine hesitancy out there, and that that people, if they don't understand or are suspicious of a technology or something that's offered through institutions and comes via pharmaceutical companies, that it raises concerns, especially in this day and age when people have access to so much information. So part of my motivation is to try and demystify that a bit and provide good, simple, straightforward quality of information, so people feel like they have a better understanding and are more informed in their decision making. With a pandemic, there's no doubt that getting out of this pandemic is going to be dependent on vaccination. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's that brings us to our next point. Kind of explaining your article a little bit, or just your opinions on vaccine, or maybe not so much that right away, but maybe just the information that you want to provide, get out there through this podcast, through other platforms. Can you go through a quick history? You were talking about variolation, and then that transformed into vaccines. Kind of what's the difference? And then, kind of the main thing is, what happens when you're given a vaccine. I think a lot of people get confused by exactly what happens.
Yeah. So of course, we've always been subject to infectious disease in human population, and animals are as well. Any living thing is. We see it with plants too, right? And so we've always been subject to infectious things in history, and sometimes devastatingly so. The humans have almost been wiped off the planet because of infectious disease. So the idea of vaccination really was actually first used in the Chinese dynasties. We don't have a lot of information, but it is documented that there was some kind of preventive inoculation that happened. But the first really clearly documented cases were around the 1500s in the Ottoman Empire. Again, more reference, not a lot of detail about it, but variolation, which you mentioned, it was the first really clear, scientifically documented attempt at vaccination. And what they observed was that when people were exposed to other people with infectious disease in sort of a very controlled way, rather than just randomly exposed, sometimes they got a milder illness. So you can imagine in the case of something like smallpox, where people have these open infectious sores, that if someone had just a very tiny exposure to that, as opposed to sort of living with them or working with them or whatever, very tiny, sometimes they had a very limited infection and a milder infection. And that gets back to viral load or bacterial load. We know that people have a mild exposure may have a milder initial illness than people who get a huge exposure. So in that is variolation, where you take the actual disease and you expose someone to it in a the actual living organism in a limited way. It's still potentially very dangerous because you can't control the amount of exposure. So some people just got sick and died anyway. So variolation was sort of this early idea that maybe you could control the exposure.
So that's not what a vaccine is.
That is not what a vaccine is.
They're not infecting us with the disease.
No, that is not. But it was interesting to observe that. And so scientists at that time sort of observed that and went, okay, I wonder if there's something there that we could do. It wasn't too long after that they noticed that in the case of smallpox, which was a real scourge, right? Smallpox was just everywhere in Europe, and it caused, even if you survived it, you were scarred all over your body. It was terrible. And so what they observed, this classic thing you hear about is milkmaid skin, that milkmaids, girls who did milking of cows, seemed to not get smallpox. They had this beautiful skin, and because they didn't get smallpox and they weren't scarred up with smallpox, and they're like, well, why are they not getting it when everybody else is? And what they determined, or what they observed, is that those young women or this milk, the people who milk cows, were exposed to cowpox, a version of smallpox that only cows get, but doesn't cause illness in humans. You can be exposed to it, but you don't get sick with it. So what they decided was, if we can infect humans with cowpox, which doesn't cause illness in humans, but it's similar enough to smallpox that it confuses the immune system to thinking, you've been exposed to smallpox. You develop antibodies that are similar enough that if you do get exposed to smallpox, you're protected. So that is vaccination, where you are exposing the individual to something that cannot make them sick, but provides protection against the actual infectious agent. And that was the first case. There was a Dr. Jansen who was the first, and he set up vaccination clinics with cowpox to humans, and that conferred on them immunity from smallpox. So all vaccine theory is now based on this idea that if we can train the immune system produce antibodies without infecting an individual, then we can provide them immunity from that actual illness. So fast forward to this day and age, and when we start looking at something like COVID, we knew that COVID is a coronavirus. Coronaviruses most commonly in humans cause things like the common cold, except this is a new variant, which our immune systems have never seen before. And that is always a problem when we have an absolutely new novel type of infection, because even though it's in the family of cold viruses, it is not similar to any other cold viruses we've ever seen before. So we tend to get this crazy immune response to it because it's like totally foreign. So it's important to understand when people get COVID and they get very sick, is their immune system that is making them so sick, because they're mounting such a crazy response to that it's just flooding their lungs. It's causing inflammation and scarring of the lungs. It can cause damage to the gut and to the liver and everything else. That's all related to your immune response, which is out of control. And that's why they treat it with like steroids to suppress your immune system and all that kind of thing. So we know that the coronavirus in this case is similar to other types of coronavirus. When they wanted to start to look at producing a vaccine, they were like, okay, what is the thing about coronavirus that really our body sees first? And the first thing, of course, everybody's seen the pictures, is the spike proteins that surround that viral particle. That is what allows that virus to attach to human cells. And we know that it particularly attaches to certain cell types in the nose, the throat, and the upper airway, which is interesting point, because this is why children don't get as sick as adults do, because they have less of these cells. So they don't get as much of a viral load attached to them when they're exposed to COVID as adults do, which is an interesting fact.
Yeah, I thought that was fascinating. I saw them in the article.
Yeah, this is why kids aren't as sick. So that viral spike protein, we knew that this is the thing that really would be ideal to make a vaccine. We want to introduce the body to the viral spike protein without the virus. Okay. And so for the 10 years before COVID pandemic came, they'd already been doing research on what are called mRNA vaccines in cancer care. Actually, they were studying these vaccines. And so an mRNA vaccine is just taking a little piece of the coding of a virus, so the RNA coding, in this case, messenger RNA, and what they want to do, the vaccinologists, researchers, is to get the coding part of the virus that makes the spike protein. We just want that part of the genetic code. And so they identified, first they did the genetic sequencing for the COVID virus very early on, and then they identified which part of it makes the actual spike protein. Once they knew that, then they wanted to make a vaccine that would introduce that code to the human body so that we would make the spike protein. Because it doesn't matter, living cells, they see the code, they know how to read it. It's like instructions. And so they will make that if they see that. So the trick with the mRNA vaccines was, how do we get that viral bit of coding into the human cells? So the new mRNA vaccines actually are very slick and elegant in that they only supply that tiny bit of coding surrounded by a layer of fat. And that is what is injected into an individual when they have a vaccine. The problem with that little fat particle that's around that bit of coding is that it's very, very unstable. And that's why these vaccines have to be kept in this deep freeze and monitored so carefully. The other vaccines, the viral vector vaccines, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, Covishield, the other ones, they have used more traditional style of vaccine development, which is where they took a virus, an entire viral particle, in this case, an adenovirus, which is another type of cold virus. And they've taken a version of that cannot make humans sick. And they've inserted that little piece of mRNA into the genetic code of that adenovirus. And then they inject that adenovirus into a human. And in either case, the immune cells of the body pick up the virus, or they pick up that little piece of coding and they manufacture that bit of the spike protein. And as soon as you manufacture it, boom, your body mounts an immune response. As soon as it makes it, it goes, oh, but I don't want that. That's foreign. That's bizarre. I'm going to make antibodies against it. So it's a trick of being able to sort of hijack our natural capacity or our natural immune function to both make the actual spike protein and trigger a reaction to produce antibodies against it.
And do we have any indication of how long our body will continue to make those antibodies, or how long they'll last in our body? How often we'll need the vaccine in the future? What's your thoughts
exactly.
on that?
So this is a big area of research and controversy. At the moment, the mRNA vaccines, we believe, will last at least 4 to 6 months with the first shot, which is why they've extended this dosing interval in Canada. The most recent research suggests at least 4 to 6 months. But then we need that booster. Right. And interestingly enough, with natural infections, so people who weren't vaccinated and got COVID, their immunity is dropping at 6 to 8 months anyway. Okay. So they can get reinfected. Okay.
That's good to know. Yeah.
Yeah. Cold viruses, as we know, we don't tend to produce lasting immunity against them, which is why we keep getting colds over and over and over again. Right. Because we don't produce lasting immunity. And coronaviruses are very effective at causing us to produce only this kind of short-term immunity. It's like they're able to sort of like trick us into not producing really strong immunity against them. It's part of their natural way of being able to reinfect us. So it's a problem with coronaviruses that we don't tend to make long-term immunity. That said, to your question, how long will the vaccines last after you get your second one? We don't actually know, because we're looking at that now, right? They're studying the people who've had 2 doses and checking and watching and seeing how long is your immunity lasting for. At the moment, it's good, it's lasting. How long will it last? We're not entirely sure. The companies are saying, okay, so Pfizer and Moderna are saying that, oh, we're going to be, boosting people within 9 to 12 months. They're saying that. The scientific community is saying, well, that's what you're saying. We don't have the scientific research yet to suggest that we need to boost that quickly.
It's their interest to boost this as often as possible.
It is their interest to boost us as often as possible. Now, they may also change the content of the vaccine as these variants come online. So there may be a need to boost because of the new variants, particularly the India variant that's out there now. So it is quite possible that, we'll need boosters, not because our immunity is waning, but because we need additional antibodies against other variants, right? That's quite possible.
Yeah. So I actually wanted to ask you a few questions about the variants. So from what we know, the existing vaccines will attack those variants, and we should be okay with that. Is there a point where the virus can mutate into a form that isn't covered by the vaccines that we know of right now?
Yeah, I mean, they're always looking at that, right? Like right now, they're studying this India variant. Right now looks to be mostly more transmissible and causes slightly worse illness, but it still appears that our immune system recognizes it. The worry is when the virus mutates in a way that the current antibodies don't recognize it, right? That would probably take a significant change in the spike protein to be quite different in a way that our body doesn't have the right antibodies against that, for example. So trust me, there is tons and tons of surveillance going on all the time looking at this in terms of are the new variants that are coming out still subject to the current vaccines. In India, they are using the current vaccines. So we shall see, because that's kind of like research in real time, right? Looking at, okay, these are the vaccines we have, and they have Indian variant. Are we going to start to see cases coming down as their vaccine rates come up, or are we not? And how's that going to look versus, say, the US or Europe when they were vaccinated? I know the Brits are worried about the India variant. They were going to do full opening to their country in June, but now they're starting to think that maybe we're going to be a little bit more cautious about that, because now they're starting to have India variant, which will dominate quickly. Anytime you have a more transmissible variant, so easier to spread, it quickly displaces any other versions that existed before that. So the Brits are preparing for the fact that the India variant will take over from the British variant. And they're not sure yet if the vaccine protection is sufficient to warrant complete opening of the country. So they're being cautious, which is right. It's right for them to be cautious about that.
Yeah. We're just learning on the fly, just like no. Just figuring out Zoom on the fly.
No.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the anti-vaccination perspective, because I think there's different camps involved with that. And I think the biggest gap, it's just such a polarizing topic. Like, I feel like it's like the US election. It's like you've got one camp and then another camp, and there's like almost nothing in between. Yeah. And it's really, so I think we're all guilty of like confirmation bias, and we just tend to find sources that confirm what we already know. I try my best to listen to that other perspective to understand it. So I've listened to a few podcasts from clinicians that are anti-vax and stuff, and just hear their perspective. And it's interesting, but I think there's people that feel like they're really informed, that are still missing some facts because they're coming from like authority figures. So I'm wondering, what is your approach? Maybe you can explain this from explaining to clients. I'm wondering, for people that have like close family members that are anti-vax for whatever reason, whatever camp they're in, how do you start that discussion?
Well, it's tricky, right? People are anti-vax for a variety of different reasons, right? We tend to sort of think, oh, they're anti-vax and it's just a uniform group of people are anti-vax, but it's not true. I mean, we have the truly anti-vax people who are not going to accept a vaccine under any circumstances, no matter what information you present in front of them. That's a very tiny percentage. They're really the unmovable anti-vax. The majority of people are the vaccine hesitant. They're more, and they're a range from fairly vaccine hesitant to mildly vaccine hesitant. And so that's the group that, as a public health person, that we look at. The really severely anti-vax people, the people who believe it's putting a microchip in your body or it's a government conspiracy, that kind of thing is like true belief stuff. It's faith-based. You can't touch that with any amount of information, and that's a values-based thing that you really have a hard time working with. But it's a very tiny percentage of people. The vaccine hesitant, by and large, is because of misinformation or fear or concerns of various kinds. And so in those group, you sort of want to find out what, generally, not necessarily specifically, but generally what's the concern. Public health is taking the point of view of like the best thing to do is to provide information from trusted sources. And that often means going into communities where because vaccine hesitancy in Ontario, for example, is particularly in certain ethnic and cultural groups. And so as a large number. And so it's very important in those groups that we approach them from their trusted sources. And sometimes that means their own community leaders, their own faith groups, not from us per se, but indirectly. Because as you said, Craig, there is confirmation bias. There's so much now. I mean, you only have to do a search with Google and suddenly, the thing you were searching, you're getting ads for, right? Yeah. So if you search,
it's crazy. Once you like something,
so you can imagine what it's like. If you search even once an anti-vax idea, you are going to receive tons and tons and tons of information from sources that reaffirm or give you more of that kind of information. And even if it's completely false, the volume of information and the breadth of the different places you're receiving it from make you think, oh, it must be true, right? And so that's where trying to provide people information that is good information from places they trust is a big part of the drive here. We are seeing too, as the vaccine rollout goes on, that the more people who get vaccinated, the more some of the vaccine hesitant people are like, okay, well, that's okay now, right? Like
they just start to
they
follow.
Start to follow because they not only do they see that people are not having terrible consequences,
growing a third limb,
but they're also seeing that they seem to feel safer. They're feeling like and they can be at work and know that they're not likely to get seriously ill, and they and as we move into opening, and I don't think Canada is going to be a vaccine passport kind of place, but the reality is that the more people who are vaccinated, the more we get to go back to that normal life. And as the chief medical officer of health in Canada has said over and over again, we need 75% of adults having one shot and 20% having two shots before we can open. So I think there's some of the vaccine hesitant on that lower end may go, I did whatever we need to do to get there. Let's get there, right? I'm willing to be.
And then there's the people that are just riding on the coattails and just letting everyone else carry us through. But what can you do? That's human nature, I guess. You get people from all camps.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and there, awesome. And there's 3 reasons why you want to get vaccinated. Sure, protect yourself. Don't be hospitalized. Don't die. Don't have long-term consequences from COVID. That's one. The second is to protect other people, to reduce the spread, right? And so that piece is a very individual thing. Some people are very much about, I want to take care of other people, and some people are not, right? Some people are, that doesn't concern them very much. Mostly want to take care of themselves. And that's an individual thing. The third is protecting the healthcare system so that
Yeah.
so that we take the burden so that we can go back to normal healthcare and all of that. So those are very different reasons
Camps.
to be
Yeah.
vaccinated, and some people fall more into one area than another. There's some people who personally don't love the idea of being vaccinated, but it's so important to them to see the healthcare system and to see the economy open that'll tilt them. Right?
Yeah. True enough. I think like what complicates things sometimes is as well, like if you don't get vaccinated, you could still act as a carrier and still give it to someone that has been vaccinated. So these other variables, I think that some people don't think of. They're just like, oh, I don't see, I don't see people that are at high risk often enough or whatever. Like, but you're going to see them at some point when we reopen. So I think like, so those are the pieces I think that sometimes people don't consider. And, but yeah, I see it as let's just get through this, and everyone kind of needs to do their part to get through it. And
or the other piece,
and maybe that's part.
Yeah, the other piece is where you think you're a super healthy individual. You think the COVID won't affect me because I'm in that top percentile. But understanding like the repercussions, the long-term effects, or even the ones that we've seen so far are definitely outweigh the long-term effects of the vaccine that we may not quite understand yet. But it's definitely, in your opinion, you could probably tell us a little bit more on that. But
it's very interesting, this idea that, and we're in the background you guys come from, which is really health, fitness, that sort of thing. I do also run into a certain group of vaccine hesitant or vaccine resistant people who are very much about, my immune system is stronger for coming through a natural infection. I will be better for it. So therefore, and because I'm so healthy, I'm sure I'll be fine, right? And in history, I mean, this is one thing I always try and tell people: you are never better off for having gotten sick. You're never better for having illness. This is a fallacy. It's part of a cultural thing, which is, challenge will make me better and stronger. And in some things, that's true. In some areas of our lives and experiences, it definitely is. When it comes to infectious disease, it is not. There is no benefit to getting polio ever. There's no upside. There's no upside ever to getting smallpox. And similarly, there is no upside to getting COVID. And we have seen that younger people, because they do have good immune systems, can have just as bad a response as older people. And then, we're not seeing it, but they're starting to talk about it more and more in the medical community. But the rehab issues that we're seeing, like all the rehab hospitals in Ontario are full of COVID patients, because when they come out of the hospital, there are months and months and months and months of rehabilitation. You know what it's like if you've ever had surgery and you were intubated for like a couple of hours, and it takes you days or a week to recover from that. Imagine being vented for weeks and what the consequences are to your body, right? It's devastating. Terrible. It's devastating to the body. So the recovery from that is extraordinarily long. And often there are these long-term consequences. And of course, we don't know this whole issue of the long haulers, and what that means, for people. I know in the UK, because they're ahead of us, they now have these long haul clinics in the UK, because people who are not recovering, they're not back to baseline after 3-4 months. They're starting to sort of, okay, we need to identify them and we need to get them into rehab and we need to see what we can do for them because they're chronically ill. So you don't want to get it. The bottom line is it's better not to get COVID under all circumstances.
Anything from this conversation today, don't try to get COVID. Awesome. Mary, I appreciate that info. So I want to end the chat a little bit about your personal habits. I know you like everyone kind of has their own reservations of COVID and their priorities and stuff like that. So what does your own personal health and fitness routine look like these days?
So, prior to COVID, I was regularly coming to the gym and going to classes just like anybody else. I'd done CrossFit, and then in part of the, the Guelph Community Fitness group. And when COVID hit, working in healthcare, I was the gym got closed. So then I did some virtual classes, and I took to doing daily walks, and I do, a 5K hike once a week. And then I was doing some virtual classes, and then we were back available again. And when we reopened last June, my problem is that I was seeing patients and I wasn't vaccinated. And so I felt like I was a risk to the community.
Mm-hmm.
So it was around that time that I decided, you know what, I'm going to have to pivot and do something different. So I started doing personal training for the first time in my life. I've never done that. I've always been a group class person. And I started doing personal training online because there's a reason I come to the gym. I'm not one of those people that's good at doing the home gym thing. So I really need that motivation. I need to be someone to be standing there looking at me and making sure I'm doing things correctly and making sure I'm working hard. So I've been doing personal training a few times a week. And I borrowed some equipment from the gym the first round. And then there was a brief period where I got to do my personal training in person, because I could do social distancing and masking, and especially because I'd gotten my first vaccine and it was okay. And I was, then we were back into lockdown again. And so back onto virtual. Then my daughter moved in with me, and my daughter has way more equipment. Yay.
Nice.
So now I have more of a home gym.
That's like worth its weight in gold right now.
So now my daughter and I are doing some PT together with a trainer from the gym. And, I have to be honest, I'm the most fit I've ever been.
That's amazing.
Because I've really had to, for my own personal health and well-being, exercise is like super critical to being able to deal with the stress of COVID. And I'm sure you could speak to that. Like, I'm sure you talk to people all the time where it's like exercise is so critical to the mental health.
For sure. And I'll tell you, in my experience, that is not the gold answer. That's not the standard answer right now, that I'm the fittest. Most people are not in that camp. Everyone's kind of struggling a little bit with motivation. So we're doing our best to keep people engaged remotely, but it's not the same. And, an email doesn't have the same impact as a high five. So it's tough, for us, obviously, but so kudos for you to sticking with that. I want to talk about, I love that article you wrote. We're going to talk a little bit about how people can learn more from you. But first, I want to talk about, I like asking this to everybody that's been on the show, is a reference. And it could be COVID related, maybe just a good read you've had. What's something that's impacted you that you've picked up? It could be a course you've taken that's accessible to people in the last year or so. What's been the most memorable reference for you?
You mean like a book or?
Any book.
Any book. Well, course-wise, in the beginning of COVID, for my industry as in medical, when we went into shutdown a year ago in April, the sheer amount of information that came down the pike from suddenly everything's online, and the amount of international access I had to things for free that I didn't have before.
Yeah. So, first time ever.
Yeah. Probably, so just me professionally, I had access to world experts and educational opportunities that I never thought I would have, in my own study. Right. At home, it was brilliant, including business things. I'm not a business person. I own a business, I run a business, but I'm a medical doctor, and doctors are notoriously bad business people. One of the things I was able to access was a lot more business learning, and that would be difficult for me to do when I'm working, because I'm working full time. So for me personally, the shutdowns, with each successful shutdown, when I see it coming, because I can always see it coming, I'm like, what am I going to do this time? What block of learning, what project am I going to undertake to that I wouldn't have been able to otherwise, because I'd be working. And so there's been a bunch of stuff and a bunch of books that, I've read a bunch of business books, Clockwork, the E-Myth. I've read a bunch of those books during that, just to try and see, okay, how, business is stressful and it's been really hard this year, but maybe I can take this opportunity to, when I do come back, be better at it. So that piece has been really important. This most recently, I read a book about, I have a book club I've been in for a long time. And I read a book, our book club has been having to be online. And we read a book called Children of a Faraway War, which is actually written by a local author here in Guelph. And it's
cool.
about her father, who had been in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War, and he had died in the war. And it was a story of she and her sister in their 70s trying to go out and find out about their father at that late stage of their lives. And so we had our book club just last week, and the author, came to our book club. So that was super cool. Yeah, it was super interesting to be able to have that opportunity. And that was easy because we were on Zoom to be able to have her come.
Little celebrity.
Yeah.
It's amazing during these times. you've seen like some people that you would have never heard of, and they're kind of famous now, even locally. I know some pilots that got laid off from their job, and they started a coffee company downtown, and it's pretty successful right now, and everybody's talking about it. And one door closes, another one opens, and it's great to see, right? So
I'm sure we'll see books coming down after COVID, the great pivot, right? And how many people chose to do different things, or to make change, or to really take the skills that they have and do something else during COVID, and maybe permanently thereafter, right?
It's been an eye-opener in my life, that's for sure.
I tell you, and my husband, he teaches at Wilfrid Laurier University, and his entire year has been online, and he teaches music, right? So that, and singing, one-on-one lessons for opera students and that sort of thing. So they had to make a massive pivot to be able to do that.
The acoustics are not quite the same on Zoom.
But now he's thinking, in this environment, if I'm teaching via Zoom, there's no way, because he used to work and live in Europe, there's no reason I couldn't bring one of the world experts in XYZ for a masterclass.
That's amazing.
Right?
Yeah.
And
that's very
that
cool.
sort of opportunity now is normalized. It's not a weird thing to do. It's like,
it's true.
You can just do that.
Yeah, if we could look at anything, any positive outcome that's happened, it's hard to say that, COVID obviously is a very detrimental and a horrible thing to have happened. But, looking at the positives is how we survive as a human race through detrimental times like this. And here we are as coming out on top, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be learned, and there'll be a lot of discussion. There'll be a lot of postmortems. There'll be a lot of PhD theses.
hopefully we just don't revert back to our. Hopefully we just don't revert back to the way we were, right? Like hopefully we are better from it, right?
Yeah, exactly. I hope we take the best of what we've learned from it and bring that forward, and and make some changes and allow those things to stay. I mean, some things are difficult, right? Some things have cost the government a huge amount of money.
Yeah.
And are they going to be keen to maintain those things? Hard to know. Yeah. Really hard to know. Yeah. I mean, the educational landscape has really changed a lot and is interesting. We'll see how much.
Totally. Yeah, no kidding. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today, Mary. I really appreciate your time. That was a great, very informative session. I learned actually quite a bit just on top of the article. So that was awesome.
Likewise.
How can people learn more from you on COVID or vaccines, or do you have a platform that you publish to?
I do. I always publish my blogs on our website. That's www.artmed.ca. Our Instagram as well. Awesome. Our blogs you can reach the blogs that way. So I tend to try and update the blogs fairly often, and that's where I also write articles for Guelph Today. We have a monthly article that I write for them as well. So
awesome. I'll send some links in the description. Well, thanks again for having us, and we'll have to have you on again at some point. Hopefully, when there's not a fourth wave or something happens, but hopefully we're in better times.
All right, it was a pleasure.
Thanks, you so much. Take care.
You're most welcome. Take care.
Bye.